Son of So Many Tears by Hilary Davidson. Go in the peace of Christ, intoned the elderly priest as Mary Connelly made her escape. Her heels clattered on the stone steps as she distanced herself from the few penitents whose addiction to early morning mass was as keen as her own. She was glad to be out of the church. The fact that surely meant another dark mark on her soul. It had been 7 years since Marie's last confession. When she thought of her soul now, she pictured a Victorian silhouette with edges sharp and refined, but coal black to the core. As she turned onto the sidewalk, she wondered what effect words of absolution could have on it now. Saint Rita, hear my prayer, she began to recite silently when a flame-haired woman in a black trench coat stepped in front of her. Pardon me, Mare said, stepping to one side. The woman moved to block her path. Mare Connelly? Janie Saxon. We've met before. She smiled and put her hand on Mare's arm. Last week was the 7th anniversary of her son's trial. I wanted to ask you how you felt about... You're a reporter. Mare hissed the last word and jerked her arm back. I have nothing to say to you. Well, plenty of people are interested in what Brendan's doing now. So many viewers call us about the show that we ran last week. If you would let me alone. Mare took a step back. We've been trying to locate Brendan, but we can't find him, said Janie, flashing a toothy smile. Nobody knows where he's gone. I was hoping you could help. Mare stepped onto the damp grass, and when Janie Saxon blocked her path again, she hit the reporter's shoulder with her big black purse. The dyed red head swiveled. Mare followed her glance. There was a black van on the street, with a man standing behind it holding a camera. How dare you, said Mare, her voice rising. You're nothing but a vulture. She rushed down the sideway as quickly as her heels would allow her. Did he leave the country? Janie called after her. Is he hiding out from his victims? Mare kept on, her heart racing. Saint Rita, don't let me fall, she prayed. A year before, when she turned 65, a reporter had so flustered her that she tripped in front of her own house and fractured her forearm. Mare slowed her pace now to look over her shoulder for the reporter in the van, but saw neither. As she approached her house, she scanned the street. When Brendan was first arrested, there were local news reporters and then national ones camped out in front of her house. Mare had installed an iron fence along the property line, planted a privacy hedge behind it. Even though she only occasionally heard from reporters now, the anniversary of the trial always brought them out. She liked the privacy it afforded her, which shielded her little house from prying eyes. The downside, which she hadn't realized until everything was in place, was that the fence and hedge made her house immediately identifiable as in a modest Queens neighborhood of green lawns, painted gnomes, and year-round icicle lights. She snapped open her handbag and extracted her keys, wondering if she needed to bring out that big lock she used to keep on the iron gate. It's a lot of bother for arthritic hands, she thought. She walked up the flagstone path to the house. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. As she shut it behind her, something struck the back of her head. Her keys clattered to the floor as everything went dark. Mare heard the sound of something smashing as she came to. Her vision was blurry and her head throbbed, but she realized it was her own kitchen spinning around her. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. She wanted to touch her face. The left side felt like it was burning, but she couldn't move her arms. Her raincoat had been pulled off and tossed in the corner. She was sitting in a wooden kitchen chair, her hands tied behind her back. You're awake, said a man's voice. She opened her eyes and glared at him, fury trumping fear. What are you doing? She said, her voice hoarse. She heard another crash. Knock it off, the man called out. He was in his early 20s with blonde hair and a goatee. His face was turned away from her, while one hand tapped an impatient beat on the Formica countertop. There was another crash, and a second man bounded into the room. This place is like a museum, he said, grinning. He was also young, but muscular and dark-haired. Doilies and shit everywhere. Hey, Grandma, he turned. She turned to look at her. Face on, his face was haggard, his eyes blank and glazed. What are you doing in my house? Said Marie, staring at him as his face came into focus. Whoa, she's an old hag, like you said, bro, said the dark-haired man. Mare wanted to snap back at him, but her insides were quivering. She gritted her teeth to keep herself from sobbing. Where's your cash, Grandma? Said the dark-haired man. There's money in my purse, said Mare. That's all you'll find in the house. Her good black handbag was lying sideways on the table, its mouth wide open and its guts spilled over the table. Her lipstick and compact and tissues were lying in the midst of coins and stamps and lined bits of notepaper. A prayer card to St. Rita lay on top of her checkbook. There were no bills on the table. They must have pocketed those already. All this nice shit, the dark-haired man said, bouncing on his heels and cracking his knuckles. I know you got something stashed away for a rainy day. Enough, Ray, said the blond man, sounding exasperated. The words were met by an affronted look. Fine, look for her money. Just don't make so much noise. We don't want anyone coming over. Whatever, man, said Ray, disappearing through the doorway. The blond man's eyes swept past Mare and drifted to the kitchen window. He was watching something in her backyard with a concentrated expression on his face. Mare twisted her wrists apart slightly, but the bonds were tight. Trussed up like a turkey in my own kitchen, she thought. Indignation gave strength to her voice. You should be ashamed of yourself, beating an old woman and tying her up. The man's head snapped around. Ashamed? That's funny coming from you. There was cold fury in his voice, and his eyes narrowed as he stared at Mare. Where is he? He finally said. Who? Mare asked, thin lips quivering slightly. You lie to me and I'll cut your eyes out of your head. His gaze went to the window again, but his eyes seemed barely focused. You're at the wrong house, said Mare, her heart pounding out of her chest. You're Mare Kennelly. The man looked down at her and stepped closer. In his right hand she saw a flash of a knife blade opening up. You don't remember me, do you? She looked into his eyes. They were blue with flecks of green and gold mixed in. Handsome eyes, but fatigued-looking, like someone who hadn't slept in days. They were memorable, yet not at all familiar to Mare. I don't. Your son used to bring me over. Patrick? No, the other one. Mare stared into his eyes, but she barely saw the man in front of her, one of Brendan's old friends, all grown up now, and with a knife in his hand. I didn't come here to steal, though I can't say the same for my buddy. He moved a little closer to her. I want to know where Brendan is. You're going to tell me. 7 years, said Mare. Her eyes were tearing up a little, and her voice was quavering. What? The man put the blade of the knife against the edge of her jaw. She felt the sting of the tip of the knife. It's like the sting of a hornet, hot and sharp. It's 7 years since. She was staring into the man's eyes and speaking with careful deliberation. Where is he? I don't know. Her gaze dropped to the hem of her black skirt. The words were barely past her lips when she felt a searing pain on her jawbone. The blond man had slid the knife down an inch. She looked at him and saw his eyes, almost as shocked as she was. She saw blood on the knife in his hand, and a wet patch on her skirt, darker than the black fabric. I told you not to lie to me, he hissed. You were there with him in court every day, every single fucking day, always by his side. You knew what he did and you didn't care. The scent of his breath was vile, like something had died in him but hadn't had a burial. His soul, Mare thought. Brendan had done away with that, and this was the husk that remained. She closed her eyes in anguish and guilt and began to pray to St. Rita before she passed out again. When she came to, Mare could hear the young man's labored breaths. He moved a few feet away from her. When she opened her eyes, she kept her head bowed. I remember you praying in court, he said softly. Mare nodded slightly and glanced up at him. He was flipping the knife closed and swinging it open, a movement that was jittery but hypnotic. Mare's eyes followed the blade, now wiped clean. The phone rang shrilly behind her. The man blinked in surprise. Who's calling you? It's not even 9. Could be my daughter. She live around here? No. Philadelphia. Mare swallowed, the dryness of her mouth making her throat ache. The phone continued to ring. You don't have an answering machine? Mare shook her head. The blond man picked up the receiver and slammed it down. Less than a minute later, the phone started ringing again. The man looked at it and cocked his head. Maybe it's your son calling. He grabbed the receiver and held it against his stomach. Say hello and nothing else. He held the receiver against Mare's ear and bent down to listen. She mumbled a soft hello, tried not to gag at the smell of his breath. Mare Kennelly? Janie Saxon again. Don't hang up. I just want to ask you a couple questions about Brendan. Won't quote you if you don't want... Who the hell is that? Hissed the blond man, moving his head back slightly. Reporter, whispered Mare. Oh. He looked at the receiver. Janie Saxon's high-pitched voice was still chirping out of it. He pulled the cord out of the wall. Reporters always come around this time of year, said Mare. Guess I'm not the only one looking for Brendan. He was interrupted by the dark-haired man, Ray, who stalked into the kitchen holding a china figurine in one hand, its head obscured in his fist. Man, this shit is all over the house. You think it's worth something? The blond man shrugged. Ray smashed the figurine against the wall, watched the pieces fall to the ground. I thought maybe there's like diamonds hidden in them. They're all over the house, but nothing. He looked annoyed. Then staring at Marie, he brightened. Fucking A, Paul, you cut her face good. You look even more like a gargoyle now, Grandma. Cut it out, Ray. What's the matter with you? You're all excited about doing this. Now you look like you came to a funeral. You're depressing me, man. I need more time. Grandma holding out on you? Ray turned his full attention to Mare. His black eyes held hers, making her think of a nocturnal animal whose eyes were all pupil and no iris. Where's your boy hiding, bitch? He slapped her across the face once and then again. Then Mare turned her face forwards and glared at him. She tasted blood, and fury extinguished her fear. You are nothing, she spat out, blood trickling onto her lips. Ray kicked her hard, hitting her leg and setting the chair toppling to one side. Her head narrowly missed the floor, but something snapped in her wrist, and she cried out in agony. Stop it, the blond man yelled, shoving Ray to one side and hitting him into the countertop. The knife flashed open again, but she felt her bonds go slack, realized he was cutting her free. What did you do that for, man? I was going to get it out of her. Get out, Ray. That's what you say to me, the only one who ever tried to help you? Mare curled her knees to her chest and pulled her right arm close to her with her left. The bone had to have fractured. The pain was so intense. The blond man, Paul, was on his knees in front of her, looking at her arm. You wouldn't be nothing without me, little fuck, you hear me? Ray slammed his fist out of the Formica countertop. Paul stood up and grabbed Ray's arm. For a second, Mare thought Ray was going to hit him. The big man seemed to deflate before her eyes. You don't want my help? Fine, he muttered. He turned his dark eyes on Mare. You didn't get nothing you didn't deserve, bitch. He headed out of the kitchen, and a moment later the front door slammed emphatically shut. Paul crouched next to her. Can you stand up? I think so, whispered Mare. But my wrist... He put his arm around her back. His head was so close to hers that she breathed in his awful breath, and her head swam again. But he helped her to her feet. You want to lie down? She nodded, and he helped her through the doorway and down the dark hall and into the front room. It was a disaster, she realized as he eased her onto the sofa. The room looked like it had been hit by a cyclone. There was broken glass and crystal all over the bare wood floor. Pictures had been torn down from the wall and smashed. Even the framed family photographs had been swept off the end tables and crushed underfoot. Mare automatically reached down with her left arm, picked up a silver frame, and set it on the table. Who's that? Paul asked. Vincent, my grandson, Mare said, fussing with the frame. Paul stared at it for a moment. He knelt down and picked up the photos, propping them up on the table again. That's your daughter, Caitlin, and Patrick. I remember him. He died just after Brendan was acquitted. Mare nodded sharply, her eyes filling with tears. Paul moved to the other side of the sofa, where Mare couldn't reach, and picked up more pictures. You don't have one of Brendan, he said it flatly, but a question lurked within. How could I, said Marie, after what he did? So you admit it now. Marie shrugged with her left shoulder and shook her head. I thought you'd defend him till your dying day. Paul sat on a chair and looked at her appraisingly. You and your rosaries always beside him. I wanted to strangle you back then. Dreamed about doing it with a rosary. I never understood how you could stand by him. If you had a child, you'd know. He raped kids. How could you overlook that? I believed he was innocent. All those boys testifying against him, you thought we were all liars? I hoped that it was a mistake. A mistake? Mare looked at him and wondered how she could ever explain. She'd spent years praying to St. Monica because she felt there was a bond between them that bypassed time and geography. Like Monica, Mary had had 3 children and a violent-tempered husband and a mother-in-law who made her life a hell on earth. And like Monica, she'd recognized that one of her children was a bad seed. That was the very thing that gave Mary hope. A priest once told St. Monica it was not possible that the son of so many tears should perish. Mary said softly. He was right. The son she despaired of, the one who made her life agony, he became one of the fathers of the church. Paul looked at her blankly. St. Augustine, Monica's son, it gave me hope. You thought Brendan was a saint? There was acid in his voice. A saint. What a laugh. Mary had named him for an Irish saint, Brendan the Navigator, and where had that led? Of course not, she said, but I hoped he'd get better. So he was sick? I'm not excusing him. Her voice got louder when she saw pale cheeks flush bright red. But anyone would have had to have been very ill to do what he did. You thought he was innocent? What changed? It wasn't a question anyone had ever put to Mary before, because she never talked about Brendan, not to anyone. But she'd thought about this very thing long and hard. When had she lost her faith? She could trace it to a day, to an hour, to a half-choked confession over the phone. I don't know, she said sharply. You're lying again. You got the worst tell I've ever seen. Tell? Like in poker, a tick that gives you away. When you lie, you look at your lap like there's a rosary waiting there. Mary looked at the front window and almost jumped out of her skin. Water, she said. What? A glass of water. I'm sitting here with my arm broken. You could at least get me a glass of water. Her voice quavered. Paul gave her a long look. Don't move, he said, getting up and retreating to the kitchen. Mary looked back at the window, the face of the red-haired reporter she'd seen at the church swimming in front of her eyes. Are you all right? The woman mouthed with her bright pink lips. Marie shook her head and thought she'd lose consciousness again, throbbed so painfully. Janie nodded and skittered away from the window. Paul came back, a glass of tepid tap water and a glass ringed with a shamrock pattern. He handed it to her with a shaky hand and watched her drink. You had these glasses years ago, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment. You said Brendan brought you here. Help is on the way now, she thought. All she had to do was keep him occupied a little longer. Talking about Brendan made her insides frigid and her heart stone. She could manage it for a few moments if she had to. He said if I came over I'd get a treat. Said his mother was the best cook in the world. Stupid kid I was, I fell for that. Mary's eyes followed him as he paced. Treat for him first, of course, and after he was done, he gave me pie and ice cream. Paul stood still for a moment. Rhubarb, cherry, blueberry. Made me wish I had a mother who cooked for me. You came here more than once? Paul sat down again, but he was jittery, kicking one heel against the chair. He brought me over here a few times. One of the reasons he got away with it, you know. His prickle eye kept hammering that home. If Mr. Kennelly was hurting these boys, why on earth would they go back to his house to have it happen again and again? He kicked the chair really hard and looked at his leg as if it were an entity separated from his body. Are you all right? She asked. When I'm up for days, my muscles get jumpy. Up for days? He gave her a look that was halfway between pity and frustration. I'm tweaking. Her blank look made him snort. Meth. I've been up 5 days. Ray's pushing 3 weeks. That's a terrible sin, desecrating your body. Her words made him smile and look away. My body was desecrated a long time ago. He stood up again and paced in a circle around the chair. You can't know how happy I was to find something that kept me from sleeping. Mary watched him, so filled with sadness that she couldn't catch her breath. I'm sorry, she said softly. He gave her a bewildered look. That's the first time you've apologized. He stared at her, realization dawning on his face. It's true that your other son died of an overdose, isn't it? Right after the trial? Marie nodded and dropped her head to her chest. When she tried to speak, a huge sob shook her body. She held her breath for a moment and watched fat tears drop onto her black skirt, close to where the blood from her jaw dripped down. She felt Paul's hand on her chin, lifting up her face. Brendan molested him too, didn't he? She cried softly for a little while, finally wiping her eyes and nose on her sleeve. I didn't know, said Mary. I never even suspected. Brendan was 14 when his father died. Patrick was 10. Caitlin was already 18 and out of the house. I had to go back to work to support us. Couldn't afford a babysitter, so I left Brendan in charge of his brother. And he abused him. I didn't know until the end of the trial, she said. I called Patrick to tell him the good news, that Brendan was free. He cried as if someone had died. He was living out in California then, as far from the rest of us as he could get. I told him he should be on his hands and knees praying. It was only then that he told me what Brendan had done. She shook her head. He hung up on me and I tried to call him back. I tried and tried. Finally that night I got his landlord on the phone. He went up to Patrick's apartment and found his body. An overdose, like you said. He killed himself? Accident or not, who could say? Mary stared down at her skirt. That's why you changed your mind about Brendan. By then it didn't matter. His hands were drumming against his thighs. So where is he now? Marie shook his head. I can't believe you're still protecting him. He's responsible for the death of your other son. You know that. His voice was getting louder. You know how many other deaths he's caused? How many drunks? How many addicts? He towered over her. You're going to tell me if it's the last thing you do. Marie laughed suddenly, a short, mirthless sound that was almost a bark. That would be a threat if my life meant anything to me. Paul's blue-green eyes stared at her. Do you think I want to go on living like this, knowing I gave life to a monster? This is hell on earth. I wish I were dead. Paul shook his head disbelievingly. When the trial was on, somebody asked you how you were getting through it. You said it was faith. What happened to that? I put my faith in the wrong things, she answered quietly. I have committed a mortal sin, and her voice trailed off. I can't even take communion now. I have to go to confession first. I have to tell a priest my sins, and there are too many to tell. Hiding your son from me is a sin. Paul sat down on the couch next to her. You know he's guilty. And you want revenge, Mary said, staring straight ahead. It's not just that. He put 2 fingertips on her bloody jaw, gently turned her face to his. I think about what he's doing now. I think about him hurting other kids. Mary stared into his eyes for several heartbeats and took a deep breath. He can't hurt anyone. I need more than just you telling me that, said Paul. If I tell you where he is, you have to promise me something. Anything. You put an end to my suffering. I don't mind how you do it so long as you do. Put an end? Paul stared at her in disbelief. I can't kill myself. A Catholic can't do that, Mary explained. But it would be a mercy if at that moment there was a crashing sound and shouting and men with guns yelling, Don't move! And a camera crew behind them getting everything on tape. Paul was shoved onto the ground, a patrolman's knee shoved into the small of his back as he was cuffed. No, shouted Mary. You can't take him away. Let him alone. No one listened to her. Another cop frisked Paul and pulled out a small baggie from the pocket of his jeans. This is Janie Saxon, reporting live from the home of Mayor Kennelly, mother of accused sex offender Brendan Kennelly. Mrs. Kennelly's quiet home was brutally invaded this morning by a pair of drug addicts. Mary closed her eyes and sank back against the couch, offering no resistance to the medics who swarmed around her. There would be no release and no absolution for her. Mary refused to press charges. Paul was arrested for drug possession, denied bail, shipped to Rikers Island awaiting trial. Jenny Saxon had spotted his partner leaving Mary's house, but the police hadn't found Ray. For all Paul knew, he was headed back to San Diego. One morning, Paul was told he had a visitor. He was stunned at the sight of Mary on the other side of the glass. Her silvery hair was freshly permed. She was wearing a black suit and red lipstick. One side of her face was healing from dark bruising. The cut on her jaw looked as if it had healed without a stitch. You look better, healthier, she said when she picked up the telephone to speak to him. Maybe orange is my color, he said, gave her a slight smile. I've thought a great deal about what we talked about the last time I saw you, she said carefully. I told you about St. Monica. Now, I want to tell you about St. Rita. Paula stared at her, wondering if it was the blow in her front hall or the fall in the kitchen that had jumbled her brain. I started praying to Rita after the trial when I finally knew what my son really was. Do you know anything about St. Rita? Her life was a hell on earth. Her husband abused her. Her sons were terrible creatures. She prayed for them, for all of them. The only relief she got was when they died. Paul took a sharp breath. The last thing my son Patrick said to me was, "Take care of Vincent. Don't let Brendan get him too." Mary blinked back tears. It hit me then. My grandson was in danger. Brendan wasn't going to stop. I had to stop him. She took a deep breath. Brendan could read me like a book, just like you did. Thought he would realize that something in my heart had changed. With Patrick's death, it was easy to explain why I was different. After Patrick's funeral, when Caitlin had left with her husband and boy, I made dinner for Brendan. It was never hard to get him to come over for that. He always said I was the best cook in the world. Paul swallowed hard. "Do you think anyone's listening to this?" Marie said idly. "Be an interesting test, won't it?" So when Brendan came over, I served him dinner. And that was the end of that. "You mean you..." Paul's hand shook and he gripped the receiver. It had to stop. It was the only thing I could do. "But how did you get rid of..." "There's a rather large freezer in my basement," said Mare. "Next time you come over, I'll show you." She sat straight in her seat. "You have a fine way of listening to an old woman prattle on. Almost as good as a priest." She started to get up. "Keep in mind, you made me a promise," she said, leaning close to the glass. "I intend to hold you to it."